Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Seabass of WNWS of Jackson, Tennessee. We thank our title sponsor, WellSpire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. WellSpire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-presenting sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland and Belk is committed to fighting for those who have been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt takes on SMU in men's basketball Saturday night. Tip-off 8 Central on the SEC Network. The guest line is presented by Boll and Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years and loved them. Had no clue what I was missing until I got them. They are fair trade certified, meaning they are made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy and get $50 off your first set of sheets. Seabass joins us today. I think it has been about 3 weeks. It's been the holiday season. You have been sick a little bit, still are sick. And frankly, I think we all needed a break from this year.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys can tell. I can't tell because I'm me, but can you still tell that I'm still got some of that crud going on right now?
Oh, no doubt.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize in advance.
Well, that's okay. Your content will be good, and we will, I think, spend most of our time on the mailbag today. We have several questions, but I'll give you the floor before we do that first if you want to chat about anything in particular.
Hey, I just wanted to say real quick, when it comes to basketball for the men and the women, we're getting close to conference play starting up, and I know, I understand the uphill battle. The second half of that game against Davidson was utterly frustrating. But they won that game. They found a way to win a game in which they played almost half of it horribly. I mean, the numbers are, good grief. I won't call us a skeleton crew, but it's close. But I'd say this, going into that game beforehand, if you'd have told me that they were going to get a 5-point win against a team that's, every bit as good as they are, I'd taken that. Because I don't know that this team would have found a way to hold on to win that game last year. First of all, I don't know if they've ever gotten that big lead in the first place. And on the women's side of things, look, is the schedule going to ramp up? Yeah. But, they played hard. They've had injuries too, but they're playing hard and seem to be playing with a little bit more sense of direction on purpose. Now, look, I'm not trying to pretend like basketball-wise either one of our team are about to be in the tournament anytime soon. All I'm saying is, there's at least, and maybe conference play brings everything back to earth, but there's at least something to build on both sides of the ledger for men and women.
Yeah, the thing about the Davidson game, it wasn't pretty. You didn't like the way they finished, but you can look at that in a number of ways. Davidson was a preseason NCAA tournament team by a lot of people. And I don't think Davidson is as good as projected, but you never know. There's a lot of time left in the season. Bob McKillop is a good coach. But here's one way to look at it from a positive standpoint. Vanderbilt did not have Cleavon Brown. And Vanderbilt didn't have a field goal the last 13:09 and still hung on and won that game. So under adversity, that was a win. And as you said a year ago, that is maybe not a bunch that probably would have pulled that off.
Well, and think about this. 2 things here. First of all, think about not scoring a field goal in the final 13 and still hanging up 76 points. Was it 71 or 76? I think it was 76, right? And not scoring them. And it's something else for you. How about a freshman stepping up and knocking stiff some free throws and clutch someone that had to have them? These are things, look, I am not trying to sell a bill of goods here. We're probably going to finish near the bottom, at the bottom of the SEC. All I'm saying is, man, I like the way this team plays better. They play harder, and some of these younger players. I mean, think about 2 years from now with Pippen and Dylan Disu and some of these young players. I think, okay, yeah, I think we've got something here. Last year was just a, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, what were they, 9-3 at one time and never won another game?
I think so. They lost their last 20.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know we're not great, but Davidson is a decent team, and we got the win at the end of the day. Now, what would tell you a little bit more is if this team were to find a way to, I don't know, what if they beat SMU, Chris? What does that say going into the SEC season if they were to beat SMU?
That's funny that you say that because that's what I was going to bring up next. I think if they can beat SMU, and I'm looking up where SMU is in Ken Palm right now, I think that would be a pretty good out of conference season. I think if you had gone in, SMU is 85, Davidson was 77. So if they beat SMU, that's 9-4. I think that's certainly what we would have said was acceptable before the season started. No, if they'd gone 10-3, then I think people would really be happy. And you give them a break at the end of Liberty or something like that, or Richmond, and then they'd be there. If they beat SMU, and I don't usually think that thoughts hinge on one game, but I think you have to think that they had a pretty good pre-conference season. If they lose that one, then you're kind of thinking, well, that's about what I thought they'd be.
Team is what right now, Chris? 8-4.
Correct.
Do we have something that is truly classified as a bad loss?
Tulsa is 116 in Ken Palm. That was in Nashville. Loyola is 106. That was at a neutral site. That's a bad loss if you were an NCAA tournament-bound team. They're not that. We've known that for a while. So, I mean, it depends on what your expectation is. That's two that I could argue were, but I think for where they are, I don't know that those are bad losses. Now, if you would, here's the way I look at it. I was wanting to see them win X out of X, if that makes sense. In other words, you might beat Richmond, but you might lose to Tulsa, might beat Liberty, that kind of thing. I wanted to see them get through this with 8, 9, 10 wins, and if they get SMU, then that'll be 9.
That Richmond game, what was it, 93, 92 or something like that in overtime?
Yeah, and
right?
Richmond has gotten top 25 votes, too, recently.
Let's just say, for argument's sake, and I know you can do this with anybody, but they found a way and they won that game by 1 instead. And they're 9-3 with a win over Richmond. Is the narrative any different at all? Because we're talking about a bucket.
Probably a little bit, but I will counter with the argument that I don't know that it is a really different team at that point. I mean, a bucket is a random thing that could happen one way or the other, because you could kind of play that both ways and say, well, they beat Texas A&M Corpus Christi by 5. That team's 296 in Ken Palm right now. They beat Southeast Louisiana by 8. That team's 328 in Ken Palm. Both those games went down to the final couple of minutes. So that sort of could go back the other way, but just from a win-loss standpoint, yeah, it would make a difference in how they're perceived. I don't know that it makes them a different basketball team, but certainly people would feel a little better about things.
Well, I'll ask you one simple question. At this point, at 8-4, I'm assuming you've seen basically every second of every game. Are they where you expected? Are they a little ahead of what you expected, or are they a little bit behind?
Just a little ahead of where I expected. That said, it was hard to know what to expect, man, because they were so bad last year, and so much of their contributions are based on freshmen. I will tell you this. When you look at it individually, I would not have thought Neesmith would have been this good. I would not thought Saban Lee would have been this good. I didn't expect Scottie Pippen to be that good on the offensive end. Of course, and Cleavon Brown's been hurt, and that's hurt them a little bit. It's weird because the composite is about what I thought they'd be. Again, probably a little bit better, but when you start looking at players, that's three that have played better than I thought would. I guess I thought Dylan Dessou would have given them a little bit more offensive punch by now. And some of the rest of the kids, I just didn't know what to think of. You didn't know what Abena would be exactly. I think that's a rambling answer, but if you want my complete thoughts, there they are.
Right. And plus, remembering that the Davidson game, as you mentioned, is without Cleveland. That's a huge deal. I mean, Cleveland's not an 18-10 guy, but he's a huge part of what we're trying to do, and it changes this team completely. So, some of these wins without him, I think hold a little bit more weight. But, this team started, what was it, Chris? What did they start against Davidson? 3 true freshmen, a sophomore and a junior?
They started Neesmith, Dessou, Pippen, Wright, and Evans.
That's 3. Yeah, that's what that is. 3 freshmen, a sophomore, and a junior.
Right.
This is still an extremely, and I know Saban, it's a different situation, and I get all that. But still, the fact of the matter is this team started 3 true freshmen. I see a blueprint. I do. Now get off the players and go straight to the sideline. Jerry Stackhouse. We're 12 games into the Jerry Stackhouse experience. Your thoughts so far?
I like the coaching. I like the demeanor. Everything about him that I've been around personally, I like. My concern is the recruiting. Because I think he's been pretty clear that their bread is going to be buttered on the development side, and that will come at the expense, time-wise, of recruiting. I'm just not sure that's a winning formula in this league.
I agree with that. Will we see him be able to fill this thing out with more along the lines of adding pieces like Isaac McBride through transfers and whatnot?
Yeah, that's just hard to say. The McBride deal was a really weird one because he basically got disenchanted with Kansas, or Kansas got disenchanted with him. I don't know what the story was before practice had even started, or maybe not then, but certainly long before the season started. That was an odd deal of a kid that blew up that I think a lot of people didn't know a lot about. I still don't know what to make of that one.
So now what's the situation here? Is he enrolled this semester, the start of this new semester? What's the situation there?
I think so. I'm glad you asked. I need to check on that. I presumed that he was, but it's not a topic that's come up. We had the signing day thing and then all the coaching carousel, and I honestly had kind of forgotten about that till you just mentioned it.
And he's not eligible with the next season, is that right?
I don't know right now if they've determined for sure if it's the start of next season or if it's the first semester of next season. It sounds like it is the latter, but I'm not certain on that either. And that's probably going to be one of those things that if it's the case, it'll get appealed, and the NCAA will probably take its sweet time and make a decision.
Backcourt-wise, I know Aaron's not going to stay. Then he probably shouldn't. I can't think of a legitimate reason for him to. But you could have a pretty explosive backcourt, some backcourt running mates next to guys like Pippen and McBride. So we'll see. But ultimately, I think you're right. At the end of the day, it all comes down to recruiting. You either get the players or you can't. And if you can't, you better be way better than everybody else as a coach. And this is a league full of very good coaches, so that's going to be tough to do. What is it, do you think, about recruiting? Because, good grief, Chris, it's Jerry Stackhouse. He's certainly got name appeal. Are you concerned about the ability of the coaches, the assistant coaches, to seal the deal?
Your head coach has got to be out there. That's just part of it. I'm not saying that he's not. I'm just saying that is something that's come up a lot. He said publicly that we are going to put our emphasis on player development. And again, a coach is a coach. He's got to manage his time as he sees fit. And if he makes it work, nobody cares, right? But I'm just saying, like, if we're talking 3 or 4 years from now and this hasn't worked, I would bet money that is why. Let me say further, he may change his philosophy as he goes on. I don't know. This is his first year as a head coach. Obviously, that also comes with making connections. Again, I like the guy. I have no reason to say anything negative about him, the way he coaches, the way he treats his players. I've liked him personally. It's just one of those things I think everybody privately is questioning is he going to recruit well enough to succeed? Because I think that look, you can't say right away that, oh, he's a home run of a floor coach. Okay, look who they played. They played a terrible schedule. I've been impressed with what he's done, but who's it against? So there's that. I mean, again, I'd see no reason not to like what he's doing on the court, but I think that piece is going to determine a lot. Really, the three things that I care about this year, okay? And other than that, I don't care much about anything. I mean, if they go 14 and 17 or 11 and 20, as long as it's basically the same, as long as they're developing players, as long as they're making progress from recruiting, that's what I care about. I think it's those two things and whether Aaron Nesmith comes back for next year and or beyond that really are all that matter at this point. It's those three things, and everything else is just really irrelevant at this point.
Though, believe me, I would love to see him do so. There's no reason for Aaron Nesmith to come back.
Oh, I agree. Although, having said
I mean,
that,
what's he going to be next year that he's not this year?
well, I don't know. And look, he's getting about a 14 is where I think I've seen him ranked in recent mock drafts. I mean that could mean 11, that could mean 21. And it's way too early to see where that settles. But I will say he's a smart kid. Education is something that the family values. So if it's borderline, I wouldn't be shocked to see him come back. If he's not borderline, then he shouldn't come back.
Well, I mean, if he can graduate in 3 years, okay, yeah. But I have no idea where he is on that. But the guy's what is Aaron 6'6"?
6'5".
He's a long, smooth scorer. I mean, he's built perfectly for the NBA. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and maybe another year under Jerry Stackhouse might help him. I mean, of course, he clearly knows. I mean, Jerry was enamored with him immediately, which he should be. He's a super talented player. But I just wonder how different of a prospect he's going to be if he were to come back another year. If I were telling somebody to come back, because I think they need to, because they haven't polished this off, but another year might help that. I don't know if that would be for him.
Okay, well, here's the thing, right? He's scoring 23 points a night, and he's done half of that against the Wilmingtons and the Semos of the world, right? And not that Aaron's not a great player, okay? But if he does that, the same thing against the Auburns, the Tennessees, the Kentuckys, the Floridas, the LSUs, the Mississippi States, once they've gotten through that schedule, that's something else. And that's kind of what I'm waiting to see.
Well, but another thing with that is, though, I mean, that's true. But another way to think about that is if you are the SEC and you realize, look, we're better than this team, but the one thing we have to make sure is this guy doesn't go off, and that's exactly what we're going to do. If they're going to beat us somehow, it's not going to be Aaron Nesmith. One of these freshmen are going to have to somehow figure out a way to get it done, but he is not going to be able to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were nights where he didn't have much in conference play, and it's not because he wouldn't be a capable scorer; it's because they would have him on lockdown.
No, I agree, and my point is the guy that's going to be locking him down is better than the guy that's tried to lock him down so far. And those are the kind of things that will affect your draft projection. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Which is weird because there's no such thing as locking somebody down in the NBA.
Well, I wonder if they won't see a lot of box and one or gimmicky zone type things with a lot of emphasis on guarding him. Because frankly, you got three guys you have to worry about guarding on the floor, or two, and then three guys you don't much have to worry about guarding. And again, as the talent gets better, that just becomes harder for an Aaron Nesmith. Not that he's not capable, but we need to see it.
That's why I think that, a young man that you mentioned a minute ago, I think his development is really crucial to this basketball team as much as anybody's. Now, you might not agree with me on that, but I think that's where Dylan Dessou comes in. And they really need him to develop soon. I know he's already got him a couple double-doubles. I mean, he certainly has flashes potential. There's no doubt about that. And he's got length that you don't coach. You either have or that you don't. But if he can develop sooner than later, that's really going to help this team a lot.
Yeah, and I've mentioned it before. This is about the time some of the freshmen start to figure some things out and take that step forward. And if he shows that he's capable of giving them 15 on a given night, not average, but can be that kind of scorer on instances when they need it, you can add probably a couple of wins to whatever this team is going to wind up with in SEC play.
I mean, I don't know if you've only watched Vanderbilt or if you've seen some other teams, but Chris, this may be one of the strangest years for me for college basketball. I mean, I
Oh
just,
yeah, yeah. I mean
Chris,
the
I don't
number of
think there's a
staggering
single great team.
upsets has been crazy.
I don't think that there is a single great team out there. I've seen plenty better Gonzaga teams than this one, and they're number one in the country at the moment. There's no great team. I mean, there's no great team that everybody's got to go through.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. How weird is it that Kentucky is sitting there at 15 in Ken Palm right now?
I
With
mean,
that.
that's what I'm saying. And you know who the biggest loser in this is of all in college basketball, without question, no doubt. And they may still end up going on to have a really good year. But I'm tell you right now, if Memphis had James Wiseman, they could have won the national championship.
Perhaps.
And not that Penny's the greatest coach that ever lived or this team is amazing, but that it's so wide open out there. And you're talking about what's James Wiseman? A 7-footer, 7 with a 40-inch vertical.
Yeah.
Limited, utterly stunning. And then you add that on to the team that they have right now with guys like Precious Achiuwa. I mean, if ever there was a time, it was this year. They lose out more than anybody by James White. And, he would have been coming back in 10 days from today. In 10 days, had he not chose to leave school and get prepared for the draft. Imagine filling out your bracket this year in a bracket contest. I can't. It's flip a coin time this year, dude.
Oh, no question. Here's one, and if you get this, I'll be shocked. Who's number one as of yesterday? Yesterday being New Year's Day in the NCAA's net rankings.
I would say Gonzaga.
Gonzaga is 6.
That kind of surprises me. Who's number one?
San Diego State.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I knew that because they've been chirping on Twitter big time, their fan base has. Because, I follow a lot of Padres fans on there, and they've been chirping big time about it. Yeah. Who's the other undefeated team? It's them and like somebody else, one other.
Auburn.
Auburn, yeah. Yeah. And they've been chirping back and forth with Auburn fans.
Liberty was in there until LSU beat Liberty last week.
And look here, since James Wiseman is not playing, who's the best player in the country? Is it the cat from Dayton?
Yeah, man, his name is all over the news, isn't it?
What is it?
Obi.
Yeah. Obadiah Toppin.
Yeah.
Obadiah Toppin. Yeah. I was having a discussion, man. I was involved in the CD Craps game on New Year's Eve, man, and we were shaking them up, man. We got to talking about that, and that name just kept on coming up. And this is in Memphis, where but there's like this Toppin dude is for real. Some think he might be the best player in the country.
Back to Neesmith, it is too bad Aaron is not on one of those good Vanderbilt teams of the past because, that's when all of a sudden that would get interesting. We've talked about this before. Aaron could be the best player in the league, right? But if they go 4 and whatever in the SEC, he's not going to be player of the year, I don't think.
No, he'd have to do something really, really special. And this league's just too tough for that.
All right, let's run down, just for fun, the net rankings of SEC teams. You've got Auburn at 8. You have Arkansas 24, LSU 36, Kentucky 40. Kentucky's got a long way to go. Followed by Ole Miss 50, Missouri 52, Florida 55. That's another one that's pretty astonishing. Alabama 60, Georgia 66, Tennessee 67. Vols are hurting too. Of course, they're without their point guard. And then you go Mississippi State 80. Then there's a big drop. Let's see who's next. Vanderbilt 124, South Carolina 129. That includes that big win over Virginia. That tells you how bad Carolina's season has been. And A&M, I bet, is around 200. I'm still
Oh
scrolling to
man, they
find
have
that
to be.
one. 191.
Man, God, this team was just like 2 years ago. A couple of years ago, it was one of the top two or three teams in the conference. But let me ask you something, because this was supposed to be, and look, who knows? I mean, things could change. But this was supposed to be a pretty freaking good year for SEC basketball. Agreed?
Oh, this is off the charts in disappointment for me in terms
But
of
great
the
for us.
SEC, in terms of what it could have been. I mean, that's the thing. We were all sitting there going, man, the SEC is a league on the rise. It's got all these coaches, blah, blah, blah. It's recruiting better. And now, if there was ever a chance to take advantage of things in what is perceived as a weak year, they have just face planted.
I mean, what do you attribute this to? Because you're right. I mean, we've got the coaches, we've got the personnel, and we can't say we're beating each other. We ain't played each other yet. What do you attribute this to?
Maybe we just all overrated them. Here's the bottom line. The SEC has made monumental efforts to raise the profile in basketball, but we are still here in the midst of college football country. A lot of the
That's not
players from the
everybody
South
saying.
are probably playing football instead of basketball. And
Right.
up north, it might be a little different. I don't know. I'm just spouting off. I could be totally wrong, but you have to say at some point it's on us in the media for maybe prematurely giving them credit that perhaps they didn't deserve. But I mean, on the other hand, the thing that I always say, the most important investment for a program is the coach. And it's hard for me to find fault with what the schools in the league have done. So maybe it was just one of those things that it seems like we should have seen coming somehow, but we didn't. And maybe that's fair. I mean, you look at the roster of coaches, and those guys have succeeded basically everywhere they have been. I mean, it's 2 month sample size, so there's that also. But that's all I've got.
It's the only thing I can figure, because, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we've got the coaches. I mean, this conference is stacked with some really good coaches. That's not an opinion. It's just true. This is certainly not at the laugh of the media. I think it's just this whole season period in college basketball. It literally is just, somebody who's in statistics probably won't accept this, but it's just one of those things. These teams should be a lot better than they are. There's a big fat jumble in the top 25, and there's a big fat jumble in the Southeastern Conference. A whole lot of disappointment, or one other way to look at it would be a whole lot of parity. I don't mind parity, but not at the sake of bad play.
The problem for the league now is a lot of these teams may improve, but it's going to be cannibalizing, because if one team rises in the net by beating another SEC team, that team's going to go down. So that's where you have to make your mark as a league in the out-of-conference portion, and this league really did not do that. In fact, it took on a number of really bad losses.
So now this can work two ways for us. That means if we crap the bed this year in the SEC, that's a bad sign, because this thing was way down. On the other side of the coin is we're not going to get too much credit. Of course, we're not going to win like 13 conference games, but are we going to be able to adequately gauge things if we do fairly well in the conference? Are we going to say, because I don't want the narrative to be, we win, let's just say something crazy happens when we win 6 conference games. Is the narrative at the end of the season going to be Jerry Stackhouse has got this thing in the right direction? Or is the narrative going to be, God, this conference sucked this year?
I'm going to play this game, and I'm going to try to verify this as we're doing this. Let's see. Auburn is 1 in the league. Again, according to that, Arkansas 2, LSU 3, Kentucky 4, Ole Miss 5, Missouri 6, Florida 7, and Alabama 8. Florida's 55, and Alabama is 60 in that. That is squarely NIT territory, right?
Yeah.
So using that as a barometer, Vanderbilt finishes right in that area where they're middle of the pack, then basically that's an NIT team. And if you told anybody reasonably thinking before the season that Vanderbilt is an NIT team, you would have to be thrilled. That's my answer to your question.
Agreed. Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Now, do I think they're going to get there? No. If they get more than 5 wins, I'll be surprised. But yeah, like I said, my judgment on this season, if they do get there, then that is my judgment. Then they've done really, really well. But if they win 3 games, 4 games, I'm not necessarily going to judge them on that, especially if they're close, if they're playing hard, if they're developing players. And that is especially true with Cleavon Brown out and Jerry Stackhouse telling us after the game the other night against Davidson that they'll have an announcement on him and it's not looking very good. I think you have to factor that in too, as I think you would have thought that they have a good season. Cleavon Brown is a sizable, maybe not sizable, but certainly a decent part of it. If they have a good season without Cleavon Brown or mostly without Cleavon Brown, then I think you have to be even more encouraged with what he will have accomplished in his first year.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair because if Cleavon Brown were the make or break, then that means that Cleavon improved a great deal.
Yeah, I'm concerned that Cleavon won't be out there potentially or won't be out there for very long. And they just don't have much in the post without him.
No, they don't. I mean, and you either do or you don't. They don't just appear. You can't go buy one. So I don't know. It's going to be real interesting to see how this thing plays out. Just what we have to say about it when it's all set. I mean, I guess the only thing that would just truly be just disheartening is if we just totally did exactly what we did last year and went winless in conference, which I don't think we're going to do. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this team's better than that. But well, here's what I'll say, Chris. Do you think Davidson would go winless in the SEC?
No.
Do you think Vanderbilt is better than Davidson?
They were on their home floor in a 1-game sample size. You change venues and that answer might be different.
Maybe, but how many teams go up to Richmond and go into overtime, lose by 1 in the SEC? You think Richmond would go winless in the SEC?
By the way, Richmond has tailed off a little bit too. They picked up a bad loss to somebody the other night, and I can't think of who it was. In fact, Richmond has lost back-to-back games. Oh, they lost to Radford on a neutral floor and lost badly, and then lost by 12 at Alabama. So we'll see what that ends up being. But here's what I think is potentially a really good thing for them. They go to Auburn next Wednesday, the 8th. That'll be the SEC opener. They're not going to beat Auburn here, there, anywhere. So you get that one out of the way. And then you come home and you play Texas A&M, which is far and away the worst team in the conference right now. So there is a chance to get your SEC win and get that monkey off your back quickly and build some confidence.
Played Auburn this year. Did you know that?
They did, and I think it was close, was it not?
79-65, Auburn ended up winning that game.
Okay, but that was in Auburn too, so that's going to happen to a lot of teams. Now, when I watched Richmond play, I just man, that team does not defend very well. Really good offensive team, but they just don't do it for me on the other end of the floor. But
what's interesting now when you look at that, though, they had a span for a while when we could talk about the opponents, but the first couple of games that certainly rang true. They gave up 98, 92, but then right after that, 62, 57, 50. They've only surrendered 52 points to a Wisconsin team that beat by double figures. Held Boston College to 44, beat them 64-44, 63, 57, 71, 59, and even in a loss 73. And of course, they lost 90-78 at Bama. So they've been a little bit inconsistent. I'll agree with you, but they played a pretty tough schedule, to be honest with you.
Well, the best win they had, they beat Wisconsin, which is 28 in Ken Palm. Their next best win is Charleston, and this is all Ken Palm, 129. Then it's Vandy, 131. So, they've had 4 games away from home. One was Wisconsin. The other 3 have been losses. And the home schedule was not very strong. It is what it is. Are you ready for the mailbag? Because I don't want to kill your voice today.
Yeah, because, I've got a 2-hour show after I get done with this live on the radio.
The mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? What about life or commercial insurance? Call Josh at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. I hope you will make him yours. Tampa Door, maybe it's P Door. I may be getting my doors mixed up. Says, what made you a Vanderbilt fan? Why did you pick Vanderbilt?
Man, I was 5 years old living in Houston, and I picked all my teams on the same day. And Chris can tell you there is absolutely zero geographical significance to my teams. I didn't even know where Vanderbilt was. I just know I was 5 years old. I don't know why I picked them. I just did. I picked the Colts, the Padres, the Utah Jazz at the time before Memphis got a team, and Vanderbilt, the Philadelphia Flyers. I don't know why I picked any of them. I just did. I've been loyal to them ever since.
Yes, you have.
Yeah. I mean, there was no reason for me to be a fan, of theirs. Same thing for my football. I mean, I literally grew up in the middle of Love You Blue. We used to sing that song all the time. I'm in the suburbs of Houston, and I'm a Baltimore Colts fan. They were terrible. They were awful. And for some reason, they were my team.
Next one is from Mr. Vandy. Do you think Derek Mason made staff changes on his own, or were there suggestions from someone higher up?
I'd like to think on his own, but I'm sure that he probably heard something from above, but maybe he didn't. I don't know. All I care about is that changes were made. Now, let me just say this. I think there's a chance on the offensive side of things for improvement, play calling wise. Is it an upgrade? I think it is a little bit. Is it a huge upgrade? I don't know if that's the case. And if the name that you put out there is eventually takes the defensive coordinator job, I know that's a major upgrade. So that would be great. So there were some necessary changes that had to be made. But, Coach Mason's made a lot of changes. He's never been shy about doing that.
No, he is not.
You ain't never been shy about doing that. And that's fine if it's not working. You have to do something to fix it. But I mean, there's a lot of people would tell you that there's a common denominator there, the common theme there, and that it's the head coach himself. So
Ann Arbor says, what do you think is the steeper learning curve for a quarterback transitioning from high school to college? One, reading and reacting to defensive sets pre and post snap, or two, learning the new offense?
I would probably say the first. Only because both are extremely difficult. But look, they get the opportunity to have a playbook for a while and digest it and know schemes and things like that, what they want to do, and they can work on the mental preparation of things well before they ever step on a football field. And I don't care how crappy your football team is. When you go from high school, I don't care if you played, unless you played, like at St. Thomas or something like that, which is basically small college football, if you will. When you step on to a college football field, especially a Power 5 one, everybody on that field, even the ones that our fans mock our players and they think they're crappy football players, they're simply not crappy football players. They're fantastic football players. They're just playing against players who are far better than they are. But if you can get to this level, there's a reason for it, because I promise you they are passing up a whole bunch of good football players and signing the people that they get. They're turning down offensive linemen who are probably better offensive linemen, but are 6'1" and 270 pounds, and they can't get there. But these dudes can. But everything's relative to what they're facing. Recruiting has always and always will be the lifeblood of any program. There's no question about that. But the first time that a quarterback steps out there and sees the speed of the game, not just of the defenses, but everything around them, it's a little bit overwhelming, and it's something that takes a while. Now, having said that, lately, we have put a lot more on freshmen, and I say we, I mean college football quarterbacks coming in, and they have proven that they can handle that. I think that is because of 7-on-7 and some of the things that have been introduced on the high school level that have them ready for that before they get to college. But when you step on a football field, and let's say you're the quarterback and you're going against your defense in practice and you're running sets, every one of those players is a fantastic football player. When you were in high school, you played on a field with, you know what, your team, let's say you got 50 kids out there. And then, of course, it depends on where you are. If you're at Whitehaven, that's a little bit different. But the probability is that even on your average Friday night, there might be one or two other people on that field that can play on Saturdays. And the rest, they love the game and they're trying real hard and they're nice high school football players, but that's all they are. And it's because they don't generally have the overall length and size and speed that you have, especially in the Southeastern Conference. So they're both difficult, but that's why I think that part of the process is a little bit difficult, a little bit more difficult, just trying to truly, I mean, and I know you hear it all the time, but God, it's true, Chris. Just the speed of the game is just so much different from high school. It's not even funny.
That was a great answer.
Well, it's just the truth. I mean, that's just all there is. I mean, that's just, you don't see 5'10" offensive linemen that weigh 290 that, you know, you can't move and all that other stuff. I mean, you see those guys and they're 6'5" and they're 3. You know, I was looking at something the other day. There wasn't a conference in Division I football that did not, as a conference, average over 300 pounds across the line on offense.
Man.
Not one.
Remember when, if you had a 300-pounder, that was kind of a big deal.
I told you this story back in 2002. I went through an Athlon's magazine, and I went over every single, at that time, I think there was still 119 teams, I think. And I went over every roster of not only their current roster, but their incoming freshmen, the recruits that they had signed. And do you know what team had the most 300-pounders?
Florida State.
Indiana. Indiana had the most 300 pounds. They had 13 on their roster between offense, defense, in the trenches, and their signing class. They had 13. Now you can't even play in this game anymore, hardly. And they're not big fat cows either, you know. But I think the SEC, if I remember, I saw this. It was on a post somewhere the other day. The SEC averaged, I want to say, the average offensive lineman was 314 pounds.
Man, for this year.
For this year, which led the way by, I think, like 2 or 3 pounds over maybe the Big 12 or something like that. Big 10 was in third, but not Vanderbilt, excuse me. The SEC was the biggest, and I want to say it was the skosh over 314 pounds per man across the board.
Oh, I remember flipping through football cards in the late 70s, and your big offensive line were maybe 260.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks are that some places now.
Y'all laugh. He's not kidding. You know, I'll tell you what. I was looking over the roster of the Green Bay Packers in Super Bowl I and looking at their offensive linemen. And if I remember correctly, that's a couple years ago that I did that. Like their heaviest lineman was like 250 or something like that. You know, 260. And I'm thinking, these guys wouldn't even get an invite to a practice squad on the worst team in the NFL.
Well, it's just changed so much because used to be players would have summer jobs and things like that. And now football is their job.
Yeah. And plus the other thing that we do now is, even though look at these guys, they're physical dynamos, but we treat them like racehorses now in the sense that, you know, well, just like with racehorses now. I mean, back in the day, they might have, you know, ran them into the ground, but now treat them like a commodity. Then they're trained and they're perfectly seasoned, you know, with the perfect regimens to eat right and all this other stuff. It's not Ogre from Revenge of the Nerds, man. These are finely tuned athletes. I'm watching a very average football team right now in Boston College here in this bowl game in Birmingham right now. And I'm just looking at this offensive front, just incredible. And that's just a very average football team, but that's what we're dealing with. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but you just can't compare the physical things that you'll witness when you transition from high school to college.
Tampa Door wants to know who you think will be the offensive line coach or the defensive back coach. I will tell you from my end, I would assume your answer is going to be the same. It has been stone cold silent on
Yeah.
those. Now, we did drop a name on the defensive coordinator a couple of days ago and drop some more news on that. I'm going to leave that in our war room because I've got to make some money on memberships too. Those two, though, it has been really quiet. I mean, it's quiet is not even do it justice. I mean, I'm hearing nothing on those.
I can tell you one name that I would love for it to be. Now, it's never going to happen. If I was Derek Mason, I'd have called 5 minutes after. I don't care if Snowcross was still there. I still would have made this phone call. But Harry Heastand, the Chicago Bears offensive line, you know, he was just let go. And before you say, why do we want somebody that was just let go? He's only been there a couple of years. He came over from Notre Dame. He is one of the most respected offensive line coaches in the business. And the Bears, Ryan Pace, for some reason, you know, they had a bad offensive line year, but you know what? That's not always on the coach. That dude is a first-rate coach, and if they could somehow, which I mean, he'll go where he wants. He'll have his options. But I promise you, if I was Derek Mason, that'd be the first call that I made. But you're right. I mean, you know this way better than I do because you experience every day. This just so hard to get the information when it comes to something like this because they're so closed-mouthed about it.
Yeah, they really are. You've got to have connections in coaching and agent channels, and fortunately, that's where I get a lot of my stuff now. Vanderbilt is really, really quiet-lipped with things. But the Norcross thing was something that I had heard before the season ended that would probably happen. And I think I had mentioned that on the podcast or on the site at one point. But I had high hopes for him his first year or two. The things I were hearing were pretty good. But ultimately, the two knocks on him were that he did not always make the right choices about the 5 to put on the field, and recruiting was always a knock. He was not good in that. And frankly, they had too many assistants on their staffs. And you're seeing this now. They had Norcross and Ludwig, neither of whom were renowned as recruiters. And I think that has left a mark on their future rosters and certainly left one on the one they just played with. They have got to, with these hires, get better in recruiting.
I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. They simply have no choice. They have to. The question is, I mean, if I'm an assistant coach right now, this situation is so, and I don't want to go into a long spiel about, you know, Derek Mason and this because we know what it all is. But I'm simply saying, as an assistant coach at another place that gets this offer, I mean, if I take that job, the odds are, okay, even if, let's just pretend and just say this is the case, that Vanderbilt keeps Derek Mason no matter what another 2 full years happen. Do I really want to come here when I know this situation? If coaches talk, they're not stupid. They know the deal here. They know what's up in Nashville. And if I'm looking at that, man, you're going to have to really make it worth my while, because if I start looking at it, you know, in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, so, okay, well, how much money on the back end is this going to cost me if I go to this place and we bomb? My phone's not going to be ringing. You know, Chris Ballard, the general manager for the Colts today, in his season-ending press conference, was talking about how he hasn't had any requests for Nick Sirianni or Matt Eberflus. That's the offensive and the defensive coordinators. He hasn't had any requests for interviews for either one of them. Now, that wasn't the case last year. He was fielding requests for both of them. Well, why did that happen? Because they had a terrible year, and it became a pretty bad situation. Now, what do you think the situation is like in Nashville? And if you're out there, you talking to your agent and say, okay, well, we're sitting here at, you know, wherever, you're kind of starting to happen a little bit. People know who you are, you know, and you're pretty well thought of. Yeah, it's the SEC, But understand that this situation is not a great one right now, and nobody can give you any true concrete answers. You might want to think about that before you're happening a little bit. You might want to think about that before you take that job.
The job, in terms of guys that they would want to hire, I would think there are two kinds of coaches who would be interested in that job that they would probably want to hire. One would be the up-and-coming assistant who would like to be their head coach in a year or two, and I don't have a lot of evidence that they've been involved in that with that type of candidate. The other one would be the guy who is established enough to where if this doesn't work out in a year or two, he can go get another job at a decent school and make a decent salary and just wants to live in Nashville for a year or two or whatever the reason might be. Or have on your resume for a year that you were in the SEC or in the SEC again or whatever the case may be. I think those are the two types that make sense for them, and from what I am seeing, it's centered a lot more on the second. Nobody that would be a threat to take the job from him in a year or two.
The latter makes much more sense. That up-and-comer is the one that I'm more worried about than anybody, if I'm them. I mean, like I said, you're starting to happen a little bit. Like, make no mistake, Joe Brady's not ever coming to Vanderbilt. He's way above that, and he knows it. You couldn't get him to take that job. You couldn't get him to take the head coaching job. You'd have to offer him saving money to consider that. Because big picture says it's a bad investment of your future, of your time. And so, I think it kind of shrinks the pool a lot more, in my mind, to the latter of what you're talking about. As a young coach, I would need some. I know what you're saying, and sometimes you think, well, if I say no and they come calling, they may not come calling anymore. Well, yeah, sure they will if you're the goods. And if you are, you'll be found out. So they need you a heck of a lot more than you need them.
The next one is from Vandy Nash. Let's say Vanderbilt wins 4 games or less next year. Let's say you are forced to place a bet on Mason's job status for 2021. Do you bet $1,000 that Mason is back in 2021 or gone?
I bet $1,000 that he's back. Like I told you all this last time, if you didn't fire him this year, then why would you fire him at the end of next year? Unless your thought process is, okay, I got some money, a decent chunk of money off the books. That could be one way of looking at it. But if it's just from a pure outlook standpoint, tell me, Chris, seriously, answer that question. If you don't fire him at the end of 2018 or 19, then why would you fire him at the end of next year? Give me a legitimate answer to that, if there is one.
Okay, there are legitimate explanations. I'm not saying they are the right answers, but this is, nothing about Vanderbilt is ever simple, right? Nothing, ever.
Of course, and we know that.
Okay. He was going to cost them, and I would not by any stretch swear this was the right amount, but this is where the consensus of conversations centered around $12 to $15 million. I heard as low as 9 or 10. I heard as high as 20. Now, I have heard since that David basically guaranteed just about everything that was left on his contract, which I think he's got probably 3 to 4 years left, which that lines up. Let's say he's making the last reported salary that he made, I think, was $3.3 million. And usually salaries increase a little bit with the year. So let's use 3.5 just so we can round off easily. Let's say that he's got 4 years left of $3.5 million. Well, that's $14 million. And if it's 3, then you're looking at 10 and 10.5? If my info is right on that, then that's kind of what you're looking at. That would decline by, I guess, roughly $3.5 million a year. Now, again, I don't know if that's a consistent number. 3.3 was the last one I heard. Again, I presume that there's an escalation in salary because most people get raises year after year. the thing that I'd heard all along was that the buyout went down significantly after this year, but I still think it's going to be pretty expensive. Again, you can kind of do the math based on what I just said with no guarantees that that's true, but that's where the discussion kind of keeps settling, is that a lot of his contract has been basically guaranteed. Now, I don't know if some of it will be renegotiated. There's been talk about that's the kind of thing you do. You renegotiate things and you take away guarantees on buyouts. I don't know how that's done. Plus, he seems to have all the leverage in the deal. So if I'm him, I don't know why negotiate. I mean, unless he just thinks he's going to start winning 8 or 9 games and wants to bet on himself and say, okay, fine, you give me something down the line if I succeed in return for this, which he'd be silly to do. You have that on one end, and out of Vanderbilt, the United narrative for now a couple months has been that he's never really had a chance, that the support's not been there, that they want to see what they can do with him once he has support. Again, this is just me telling you what's been said. It's not an endorsement of that line of thought. By the way, and that's the same kind of language I heard last year right around the Arkansas game, which I think they basically extended him before that. So he really hadn't even had any success last year when they decided to go ahead and boost his contract into the future. I've said this on the board. I don't understand that language, because if you're going to say the head coach hasn't had a chance, I don't know how you fire coordinators, because they're living under the same conditions. But for whatever reason, he plays by a different set of rules than everybody else. Certainly plays by a different set of rules than Bryce Drew did, who had some legit excuses built in, and those were not taken into consideration a year ago.
But think about this. Oh, okay. So what you're telling us is that you're going to give him the toys that he needs to play with. Even if you started to do that, when would that be ready?
Well, that's where I'm headed next. If that is really the line of thinking, then I think you're looking a couple more years at this. If he has a winning season in there somewhere, then he may be your coach beyond that. Now, that is taking all that at the face value. The last time they said that, that's how it played out.
Right. Which, by the way, would be fine with me, because winning is winning. I mean, if he's winning football games, then we're having a different discussion. So, I mean, I'm not going to get pissed off if he starts winning 7 games a year,
Right.
Just because it's him. I don't care if it's, Granny Brown. If Ted Sapp Sucker and win 7 games and win a year in Nashville, I don't care what his name is. I don't care what schemes they run. You're winning football games. That's what matters. But my question to when I hear that narrative that you're bringing up, and then, I mean, you're just echoing it, and I understand that that's the case and it's true. But my question is this. Okay, he's never had this. He's never had that. What does he not have that James Franklin had? And don't give me this, this wide that he could bring in any and everybody. James Franklin wasn't bringing in, guys with 2.0 grade point averages. So from a stuff standpoint, from a facility standpoint, what is he out there not playing with that James Franklin had?
That's why I don't understand all this. He's playing by a set of rules that has not applied to anybody else, and I don't really get why.
I guess my question is, when that gets asked, what's the response from Vanderbilt? I mean, if you're in charge of answering that question and you get asked that question, what do you say?
The response I've been given is they think that he has a lot of potential with the right support. Haven't said that for a minute, okay? We all know, we have all had to say things at times in our life that we didn't believe, but you've got to have a public narrative. And when you're keeping him for another year, you've got to say something, right? That's why I would not bet my life on that. That's one reason. I'll get to the other one in a minute. Because we all know what that's like. We've all had to say things to put the best face on a decision because you had to say something. I agree with you. Like, if he starts winning 7 or 8 games, nobody's going to care because people will be happy. But the coach that he is now will not do that. He's got to be a lot more prepared. He's got to work a lot harder. They're going to have to get it after it harder in recruiting. They're going to have to change a lot of things that have nothing to do with the things that they're talking about if he's going to see that. And you know what? It'd be great if he did. I think Derek's a pretty decent guy. I've always gotten along with him pretty well. The way he's running his program now is not going to work. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that. Now, if he changes and gets support, who knows? I wouldn't bet on it, but right now that is the reality. He's the coach. I'm not convinced that even with the bad year, he will not be back for 2021. Now, here's the other side of that. The coaching community does not believe that. The coaching community thinks he's dead man walking. I've said this before. You have to listen to channels inside the school you cover, and you have to listen to ones outside. And there was a lot of distinctive buzz that he was going to be gone after last season, to the point where I was hearing names. So is the explanation putting on the best face, giving a chance for one more year? Then if it's another disaster, then at that point, if they dismiss him, nobody's going to care. They're not going to go back and pick apart the language from the year before and criticize Vanderbilt. Everybody's just going to be happy and move on if they have another disastrous season.
Those people that think that, they're imagining what most programs would do.
And Vanderbilt is not like any other animal out there.
No, they're unique and not in a good way.
Yeah, agreed. Let's see. VU Titan says, how much power do you think the new offensive and defensive coordinators will have?
Ultimate power. I'll say this. If the name that we think, and at least certainly hope, takes the defensive coordinator job, I think he'll have a whole lot. I think he'll need that to make that decision. I mean, the money's certainly right, but he ain't coming there to just do what Derek tells him, I don't think. I wouldn't imagine. That would seem out of the ordinary for me. I don't think that would be the case. So now offensively, we can sit there and talk about what Andy Ludwig did in Utah as opposed to what he did here. But I think that you have kind of intimated that a few times over the years. I think that these OCs are basically being told, this is what we do here, and this is what I want. And you can modify it a little bit, but ostensibly at the end of the day, this is what I want to run. He's wrong, but, that's okay. I think that's what's going on, don't you?
They may run a spread offense or whatever, but what he wants to do, he wants to run clock and control the ball on the ground. And it's interesting. You go back and look, and a lot of people think that the Keyshawn Vaughn was hurt. And this is coming from inside the program narrative that they always use was nonsense. Now, having said that, Keyshawn demonstrably got hurt at certain times. So there is some truth to it. But, I asked one time, are you guys worried about running Webb till the wheels fall off? And the answer was no. And you look at how many touches Ralph got compared to Vaughn in the time they were starting running back. So, again, Vaughn got hurt, and so that accounts for some of it. But what I was told is like they like the guy who can get 4 yards at a time and run the clock, okay? Which Ralph did that, and Ralph got – I don't know where Ralph ranks on the all-time SEC carries list, but it's got to be up there. And, they never go up-tempo, as we've noticed. And from what I heard, look, Ludwig gets to call the offense and design it, and like you go to practice and he's in charge. But the explanation I got is Derek was in his ear a lot. We want to run the ball here in certain spots. So knowing all that, you know what he wants to do. He wants to keep his defense off the field. He wants to control the game. I don't think they're going to go to a Texas Tech offense or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you do with the freshman quarterback, it could get pretty ugly. Look, I just don't think it's going to be pretty for them on offense, however you slice it next year. Again, it's like basketball. You just look at it and you say, are you developing players? Are you getting better? Are you giving people hope for the future?
No and no.
Well, which again, that's the thing that I've said too is if a goal in bringing him back is you got to have a winning season next year, why bring him back unless you just can't?
Look, along the lines of player development, and I've told you this before, there are players they're going to be good no matter where they are, no matter what system you put in. Keyshawn Vaughn's good at Bowling Green. He's good at Notre Dame. Florida is good at. I don't really that takes his game to the next level. You know what I mean? I don't see enough of that. And what's crazy though, I say that, but at the same time, we've had a couple of guys over the last few years who have really, even guys who I didn't expect to even really get much of a chance to play on Sundays. We've seen some of them who, not just those, but some who did have the chance to play, would go up to the league, and I'm like, wow, they're better football players than I thought. They were nice players here, but they went to the next level and showed that they're even better than that. And you think to yourself, man, did Vanderbilt sneakily do the good job for player development, or are we just now seeing what these kids can actually do with some good coaching?
I've always thought he was a little better recruiter than he got credit for, which begs the question, if he worked harder in it, how well could they do? I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, as far as the recruiting goes, that's giving him toys, basically, that giving him stuff to work with. If that's the case, that can only be beneficial to a Vanderbilt fan. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But, that has to be, tonight, not next year. Think about it like this, Chris. Tennessee just finished, of course, we still have another signing day to go, but, from this signing day, they finished number 9 in the country. Number 9. That's fantastic. Agreed?
Yeah, that's great. If you're not, unless you're Alabama, LSU, or Clemson, you'll take that.
But my point was that was good enough for 7th in the conference. 7th, Chris, 7th. Finished 9th in America and 7th in the country. The only 2 teams out of conference that finished ahead of them were Clemson and Ohio State. 2 teams who played in the semifinals. So, that's kind of my point. These toys are great and we need them, but we're so freaking far behind right now. It can't wait 5 more minutes. And even then, it's an uphill battle at best. But, whatever it is that they're planning to get him, do it right now. If you really believe that this is what he needs and that you might have a coach and he needs it, then you do it tonight.
I do think that's where some of this is fair, because you can't tell me if they didn't have better facilities, he could not have recruited better. It just, to me, it's what do you do with them once you get them here? And that's where I think he falls short. Yes, he needs to get better players in some spots. He needed to get better defensive linemen. He didn't. They needed to recruit better on the offensive line. They didn't. And that's a big chunk of the game right there. But you look around, they had some receivers. They had tight ends. They had some running backs. They've had some defensive backs. He's gotten players in spots that traditionally are a lot better than Vanderbilt gets.
Maybe, but you also have to remember when you're talking about the defensive line, and while it might not be new, they're new to us. Derek Green and Malik Langham counts. You might as well count them as part of this class defensive line wise.
Yeah, I agree.
And both of those guys are going to be counted on heavily next year, no doubt.
The biggest problem is, how do they recruit for next year? Because he's coming off a bad season. He's perceived in the coaching community as a dead man walking. Those are 2 things that are just impossible to recruit to, which, again, that points me back to, it makes sense to bring him back based on the way they've arrived at this, because other than expense, it just made so much sense to cut bait now.
It does, but let me ask you this. Think about this for a second. We'll have to wrap this up because I got you ready to go. The whole perception of the dead man walking and all this other stuff, death knell and recruiting. How did he flip players like DeRicky Wright and Mike Wright? Knowing that, because if that narrative's out there, and I totally believe that it is, how do you flip caliber players like that?
This is the only theory I've got, okay? Because that blew my mind too. If you sit down and talk with him one-on-one, the answers are not always going to be the most coherent, as we know, but he's a likable guy. Like, if you didn't know him from Adam and he comes in your living room and wants your son to play for him, he's likable enough that he can sell a lot of people. I've always found a lot of things about him endearing. As I've said repeatedly through this podcast, a lot of their issues come down to he's not prepared enough. And to prepare, you've got to work harder, and you've got to work harder in recruiting. Maybe the scare of the word being in the coaching community that he was going to be gone. And again, I think he would have been gone if it had been signed off on above Malcolm Turner's head. Maybe that was enough to put some fire in his belly, so to speak, to get after it a little bit harder. I don't know. That to me, after all the stuff that happened this year, the fact that they could flip right or both the rights as late as they did under those circumstances was remarkable.
I hate the prospect that they lost. The big kid headed to Northwestern. But all things considered, the fact that they held on to some of the players that they did to me was a minor miracle. But they did.
The big thing will be Kaufman. And if they get Kaufman, let's put it this way. If you could make trades, would you trade Jordan Butler if you could get Wright in return? Because I would.
No, when you talk about the overall versatility of DeRicky Wright and the myriad of different places that he could help out a quarterback in a position where, I'm super excited about Ken Seals, but I can't put it all on one prospect. No way I'd take that over both rights. Give me both rights all day long.
Yeah, and I wouldn't make that trade if I were you or either. I mean, that's why I'm offering it. So if he closes with Kaufman, he's closed astonishingly well.
I mean, I don't know how anybody can argue with that. I mean, it's right at the edge of the top 50 in the country. And when you look at some of the teams that they've beaten out, frankly, and considering the situation, it's totally a surprise.
Back to the question you asked me, I don't know how they pull that off at the end, but if I'm him, you better bottle that and take that going forward, because that's a pretty good close if that's how it closes.
Yeah, no question. All right, we got any more questions?
We do not, so why don't you give out your Twitter handle and your address where people can find your show?
My Twitter handle is Big Pimpin' Spending Cheese, and my Twitter handle is actually @Seabass. You can find me online at WNWS.com, and you can listen online you can listen to me 101.5 FM 6 to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday.
He is Seabass. I am Chris Lee. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast again next week.